Good. All right. So once again, good evening to everyone. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've had a good week off from the collab sessions. I'm not sure if you've had other collab sessions last week, but hopefully at least you had some downtime in the slot that we usually have stats in. So I just wanted to give you some downtime last week since you did have your assignment being due, and obviously other assignments also coming in quite quickly. So we skipped last week. I'm not sure that you have had a chance to catch up with the recordings. So I am doing an additional example covering Learning Unit 4. Only a pleasure. I know it can get a bit much with your due dates for everything, and it's generally quite close to each other, so you do need a bit of downtime as well. So we have Learning Unit 4 that we're looking at today. I did upload a recording of it, and I did say to you guys that it is something that you can have a look at if you have a minute. But obviously, again, because I did give you that downtime last week, I honestly don't expect that you would have definitely listened in on that recording. So I am covering another question on Learning Unit 4 today as well. So there are two questions here. It is the first one based on Learning Unit 4 with 20 marks, and then also another question worth 20 marks on the next page as well. As normal, you can download this worksheet if you'd like live on the session. So the download icon on the top right-hand corner, but I will also make this available on VC Learn. The one that I had uploaded a recording of last week, that worksheet, I also have that. I think I did upload it already. I'll just double check on that. So that's also another worksheet. It's not the same one that I'm discussing today or working through today. That was a separate revision worksheet for Learning Unit 4. And because obviously there is a recording available covering that worksheet, I decided to do different questions in today's session. So it really would be quite pointless if I covered the same questions because then you just have a duplicate recording. So these are two questions from last year, some of the assessments that were written last year. So they are so apt, completely the type of question that you can expect in your assignment 2, in your exam. So it's really quite useful. And I will also make this worksheet available. So both the worksheet in the recording I made available and this worksheet will be available on VC Learn. So let's get started with this. Learning Unit 4 is quite an easy section. It's quite straightforward. It's one of the more enjoyable sections, and it's really easy to pretty much total this question or get really good marks in it. It's one that you can honestly bank on where you're like pretty much guaranteed the 20 marks. So very aptly very apt mark allocation here is your 20 marks. You'll see the question on the next page as well, also 20 marks, because in your exam, it is also going to be a 20-mark question. So it is exactly the kind of thing you can expect. The mark allocations, pay careful attention to them so that you know where your common areas are in terms of how they ask the section. And again, because there are 6 questions that you need to answer in total in your exam, it's 20 marks per question. So let's get started with this one. It's the section called, so Learning Unit 4 is called Linear Regression and Correlation Analysis. So naturally, as we always do, you will have to read through the content of the learning unit on your own. I focus on the application in these sessions so that you're comfortable with how to carry out the commonly asked stuff. Look, the reality is it's obviously a numeracy module, and it is pointless for me to go through slides with you where you have excessive amounts of information in your textbook, or your slides have explanations of everything. I would prefer to work through the examples to show you exactly how you will need to answer them. And obviously it's easier for you to understand if I'm showing it to you in a live session as opposed to you looking at it on your own and trying to figure out what is what and what represents what in each formula, that kind of thing. Although the slides are really detailed and the textbook has everything you really need, it obviously is much better to have these questions where you're looking at an exact question from an assessment from the IIE. So it's exactly the kind of thing that you can expect in your assessment, and there's nothing better than practicing those. So I prefer to do that. So you will then naturally have to go through the content on your own. You can read through the slides. It has everything that you need in terms of explaining to you what linear regression is, what correlation analysis is. I will explain it to you now, just so you have a basic understanding of it and what we're actually looking at in these calculations. But naturally, for more in-depth explanation, you'll need to go through your slides or your textbook. So this section, as I said, is called linear regression and correlation analysis. What we're basically looking at here is two variables and the relationship between them. So linear regression is literally that. It's assessing or quantifying the relationship between two variables. Now, most of the time, and up until this point, up until Learning Unit 3 that we had completed in the previous session prior to your assignment being submitted, we always went based on the assumption that it was just one variable that we were working with at a time. Now, here we're looking at a situation where there are two variables. So we're firstly trying to identify, is there a relationship that exists between the two variables? And if there is one, and that's linear regression, where we identify or we quantify the relationship between the two variables. If there is a relationship, and this is where correlation analysis comes in, we look at the strength of that relationship. So we look at, is there a positive relationship between the two? Is there a negative relationship? If it's positive, is it a perfect positive relationship? Is it just positive, it's not perfect? Is it perfectly negative, or is it just negative? Is there no relationship at all? That kind of thing. So essentially here, it's all about these two variables and identifying whether the relationship exists and the type of relationship and the strength of that relationship. So when we look at these two variables, one of them is always referred to as the dependent variable, and then you have an independent variable. So I'm just writing that at the bottom of the screen here. You have an independent variable and a dependent variable, and your dependent variable is always regarded as the y variable, and the independent is always the x variable. So you always have an x and y variable given to you. And here, what we mean by dependent and independent is that, literal to the words, y depends on x, but it's a one-way relationship, meaning it's not vice versa. Y depends on X, but X does not depend on Y. X is independent, and so it's a one-way relationship where any change in X basically explains a change in Y. So when X changes, it will change Y. And this is why Y is the dependent variable. It depends on any changes in your X variable. So they will tell you which of the two is your X and Y variable, as you'll see in the question we're working with. And then once you know which is X and Y, and you'll see in the formulas just now as well, you simply have to just follow a couple of steps and answer the questions. There's certain formula that need to be used. All of the formula for this learning unit are in your formula sheet, so you don't need to worry about learning them, which is a major advantage. So you have everything in your formula sheet. You just simply need to know exactly what they're asking you for, and then obviously which specific formula is applicable. So let's look at this question. So it says to you that the following table indicates the ages of a sample of male employees of tempered glass Pty and the corresponding monthly income of each employee in thousands of rands. Now, one thing that I want to bring your attention to here is that firstly, they've told you which is X and which is Y. They said to you the age in years is your X variable and the monthly income is your Y variable. Now, the second thing is if you look at within brackets here, they've said to you that this isn't thousands of rands, which confirms what they said in that sentence as well. But they didn't write it with all the zeros. So basically, 35 in the first one is just representing 35,000, and then 41 here is 41,000, and so on. And the reason why they haven't included the zeros is because when you work with some of the calculations here, it becomes too large numbers to work with and very cumbersome to have to keep putting in the zeros for each of the values. And then also when you get to the table that you'll need to draw up, you'll see in question 1 here, you obviously then are, as we said, having to draw up zeros a couple of times or write out zeros a couple of times. You also need to put in totals. And the problem with that is sometimes, and it gets very easy to mess up when you have so many zeros that you're entering each time onto a calculator or writing down and so on. So you obviously don't want to have that problem where you, for instance, maybe on a calculator, if you're just also including the zeros here, you could possibly on your calculator maybe leave out 10. So like for instance, with 23, instead of entering it as 23,000, you maybe just forget a zero or you think you entered it and then you just enter it as 2,300. So it becomes a bit difficult and a bit cumbersome to write down every time. So we generally tend to, and you'll see the information is presented in this way as well, we tend to leave out the zeros. So please make note of that. If they have left out the zeros and they just indicated, like they did here, that it's in thousands, you will leave it as is. Don't add the zeros, leave it as that 2-digit number. So I'm just going to write that here. Okay, so you're not going to add in the zeros if they haven't added in the zeros as well. And even when you calculate your totals, don't put in the zeros. I will point out to you if necessary, and you'll see that's in question 1.2 here, where, excuse me, where you will need to work it out in thousands of rands. But for now, at this point, whenever you're working with the table and if you're calculating the values for your uh, linear regression equation and so on, you will leave it without the zeros. Okay, so they've given you here the figures. So that was the age and the monthly income. So firstly, here from the table, you will see that they have given you 6 different employees information. So basically they gave you one, two, sorry, I'm not sure what's wrong with this pen. Okay, so they've given you one, two, gosh, my pen is being a bit of a pain this evening. I apologize. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, no idea whether it's just Blackboard or my pen, but something's going on here. Okay, so you have 6 figures that are given to you. There we go. And that becomes your value of n. So remember when we did Learning Unit 3, we came across n, which was referred to as your sample size. It's exactly the same thing here. It's your sample size as well. So N is then equal to 6 in this example. Now I'm pointing that out because we do need to know the value of N. So this is 6, and I'm just going to erase the word sample size here. It was just to remind you that that is what N represents, and I'm going to write that just above this table. So N is equal to 6. So you have all your information in the table. They will always provide you with it. And then question 1.1 says, by completing the table below and then applying the relevant formula, determine the line of best fit for this bivariate data set. Do not change the units for the variables. Like I was saying earlier, don't add in the zeros, and no marks will be awarded if the table is not completed. Now, that's a very important point because a lot of the time students don't draw up the table and they just put in the totals. That is not what we require. There are marks specifically allocated to the table showing the values that you calculated. It can honestly range anywhere between 3 to about 8 marks or so just for this table. So please make sure that you do redraw the table and fill in the respective values. So a good or a nice thing that they do is that sometimes I honestly can't guarantee it, but a lot of the time they give you the starting point. So they say to you, complete, like they said here, by completing the table below. So here you have the table template already given to you, which says you have a column for X, a column for Y, and those two are already given to you. That's the X and Y from the table at the top as well. So basically, you're just rewriting all of those here under the X column, and then all of these here under the Y column, and then you add on two additional columns. So this is where your work actually starts. You have X squared in the next column, and then you have XY. So let's look at how to draw up this table. I'm actually just going to use the so let's look at how to draw up this table. I'm actually just going to use the table at the top instead of redrawing it up from scratch. I'm just going to extend this one. So naturally, you will have to draw up this table in your answer booklet for your exam, and then obviously in your assignment as well, you'll need to include that this table. So here you basically are rewriting all of the x values and all of the y values, and then you're including the column for x squared and xy. Now, I honestly, again, although we do or we have seen a pattern, and we do anticipate that they will tell you by completing the table below, like they had here, I honestly would advise that you learn the format of this table, just in case they decide to not tell you that this is the starting point and this is what the table should look like. I would advise learning the table anyway, meaning learn what the headings are for these tables. So, like I said, you have the X column and the Y column that are standard. That's what's given to you. So, you don't need to actually learn those, but naturally, you need to know that those are the first two headings. And then you need to know that two additional columns are added on for this part of the question where they've asked you to determine the line of best fit. And the reason I'm specifying that it's for this part of the question is because sometimes when they ask you to calculate another value, I'll explain it to you just now, your correlation coefficient, then you do need to add on another column as well, which is the y squared column. Okay, so I would suggest learning this off because just in case they don't give it to you, you don't want to be in a position where you don't know what the headings need to be. So please bear in mind when you're studying for your exam that you will learn what the headings of these need to be in case they don't give you that format or that template that needs to be drawn up. Okay, so you're redrawing the table. You'll automatically then put in X and Y. Because these are given to you, you'll literally just copy them from your question paper. And then you're going to now start with the X squared and the XY columns. So X squared is literally that. You are squaring each X value. So remember, your X values in this question is the age in years. So basically it's everything here. So all you're going to do is you're going to square each value. So the first value is 38. So you're basically saying 38 squared and you'll put in the value here. So that is 1,444. Then you have 47 squared, that's 2,209. 30 squared, 900. 25 squared, 625. 36 squared, 1,296. And 44 squared, 1,936. And that's your X squared column done. Now for your XY column. So again, literal to what it says, XY is saying to you that you are multiplying each X value by its respective Y value. Remember, normal maths rules tell you that if there's no sign between variables, it's a given that it's multiplication. So XY means X times Y. So literally, you're just multiplying each X value by its respective Y value. So 38 times 35, 47 times 41, 30 times 28, 25 times 23, 36 times 33, and 44 times 34. So those would be 1,330, 1,927, 840, 575, 1188, and 1496. And now you've completed your table. Well, not completely completed. You just have one additional thing that you need to do, which is to total these columns. So now you are going to add up the values in that column. So you basically have X in the first column. And when you sum up X, how you write that out. And this is just a mathematical symbol that we use to represent the sum of. It is something that looks like a backward or reverse E. So this represents the sum of. So here you'll say the sum of X. So that symbol and X means the sum of X. This symbol and then the sum of Y. So it means the sum of Y. Then this symbol means the sum of this column is X squared. So the sum of X squared. And then this column is XY. So the sum of XY. So here you need to then calculate the sum of that entire column. So you're basically going to add up everything in that column. So 38 plus 47 plus 30 plus 25, 36, and 44, that would give you a total of 220. So you're just going to say that's equal to 220. Then you add up everything in the Y column. That would give you 194. Then for the X squared column, when you add up all those, I don't have space in the block to write it out, so I'm just going to write it below it. The sum of X squared is 8,410, and the sum of XY, I also don't have space in the block, so I'll write it below it, is 7,356. Okay, so that is your table, and 156. Okay, so that is your table And that is just part of these 12 marks. Now, they had said to you that they wanted you to complete the table below. That was the first question. So by completing the table below and then applying the relevant formula, determine the line of best fit. Now, what is the line of best fit? This is a formula which says y is equal to a plus bx. Now, in this formula, you are calculating the values of A and B. Of the two, A and B, B is always calculated first. So A is known A is known as the second calculation because it's needing the value of B to calculate that. So also, I'm just going to write above it, A is also referred to as B0 and B is also referred to as B1. So you can either refer to it as A and B, or you can call them B0 and B1, but most commonly it's referred to as A and B. Now, again, the calculation of A, the reason it's done second is because you need the value of B in order to calculate the value of A. So we always start off with calculating B first, and then we calculate the value of A. So the formula for B, again, this is in your formula sheet, so you don't need to learn it, but I'm just going to write it at the top so that we know what we're working with in these questions. So it's n multiplied by the sum of xy minus the sum of x times the sum of y over n multiplied by the sum of x squared minus the sum of x then squared. So now let's try this out. So n, remember, we had said earlier, was 6. There are 6 values that are given to you, or 6 employees' ages that are given to you. So please make use of, and I cannot stress this enough, please make use of brackets. You will not go wrong if you make use of brackets. You will most likely go wrong if you don't, because it can become confusing and the calculator recognizes certain rules. So it is important that you do use your brackets. So wherever you see multiplication, basically, that's taking place, make use of your brackets. So here, for instance, for the first one, where it says n, and then it says the sum of xy. Because there's no sign between them, there's no addition sign or division sign or whatever, no sign between them, it's a given that it's multiplication. So it basically means n times the sum of xy. So n is 6, and then your sum of xy from the table is the last column here, and that's 7,356. So it's times 7,356. And then you're subtracting. And again, you now have two variables that has no sign between them. So it means it's multiplication. So it's a sum of x times the sum of y. So again, here, make use of brackets. The sum is here 220, and the sum of y is 194. So basically here you're saying 220 within brackets times 194. And that's your numerator done. Now in your denominator, it says n multiplied by the sum of x squared. So again, it's multiplication because there's no sign between the variables. And it's n, so that's 6 within brackets, multiplied by the sum of x squared is, here's x squared, and the sum of it is the final answer, which was 8410. So 6 times 8410, and then you have minus, and then it says the sum of x in brackets. So let's go to the sum of x. Here is x. the sum of it is 220. So put the 220 in brackets, and then you close that bracket and you have the square sign on the outside. So here, please make sure to not get confused between the two variables in this denominator. Although the sum of x squared and this look almost similar to each other, you can see that the second one has the bracket around the sum of x, and you're squaring that. So the first one here is where you squared x first in this column, and then you took its sum at the bottom. And then the second one here is where you summed up x first. So here's the sum of x in the first column, and then you squared that value. So now when you put this onto your calculator, you'll get a value of 0.71. So it would be, generally we try to encourage that you leave it as 4 decimal places here. So I'm going to say maybe just leave it as 4 decimal places so you can have the most accurate answer. So that would be 0.7068. And you're done with the value of B. So now that you have the value of B, you can calculate A. So A is then calculated as the sum of y minus b times the sum of x over n. So again here, the sum of y is this column. It's the 194 minus you have b, and then you have the sum of x next to it with no sign in between. So this is a given that it's multiplication. So this would be, sorry, I'm just going to between. So this is a given that it's multiplication. So this would be, sorry, I'm just going to erase this on the side because I don't have enough space there. I'll do it below it. So this would be 194 minus, it's B, which you calculated at the top is 0.7068. And this is why we do a second, because we needed B to be calculated first, so we can use it in this formula. And then it's multiplied by the sum of x. And the sum of x is 220 from the first column. And then it's over n, which is 6. And that gives you a value of 6.42. So you can leave the B as 4 decimal places so that you can get a more accurate answer for A. And do not forget that once you are done with this calculation, you need to make sure that you put the values back into the regression formula that we wrote on the side here. So basically in the formula, you were asked to calculate A and B. Now you need to substitute the values for A and B back into the formula. And you're going to say that y is equal to, in place of A, put in the value of A, which is 6.42. And then in place of B, you'll say plus B is 0.7068. And then you'll put in the value of x. So here, there are marks also allocated to that formula. Please, please, please make sure that you do include it. Excuse me. And you're going to also make sure that you try and leave your values as decimals, even if they don't specifically say that. Like in this question, they didn't actually tell you to leave your answers as 2 decimals. Please try and stick to the 2 decimal place rule so that you don't have any problems where you've rounded off and then they actually needed it as a decimal, that kind of thing. So to avoid any issues, please just make sure that you do leave your values as 2 decimals. Don't round off to a whole number unless they actually told you to round off to a whole number. Okay, so that is your answer for question 1.1, complete with the table done at the top. We now calculated A and B, and we put that into the linear regression equation. Okay, so any questions from your end on that one? All right. Yes, not bad at all. Okay, so let's look at the next question, 1.2, and this is where they now have said to you if a male employee is 41 years of age, estimate what his monthly income would be. Now, what happens is you would have had to have done question one first in order to answer this question. So all you're going to do is from the information in the initial table, we already know that the X variable is the age and the Y variable is the monthly income. So basically what they're saying to you is estimate the monthly income, meaning calculate Y when X is going to be 41, meaning the age will be 41. So all you do then is you take this final formula that you calculated here and you substitute for X. You make X equal to 41, and then this will give you an answer for Y. So let's look at that. So I'm just going to erase here so that I have some space to write out that formula again and then substitute and get to the answer. So y is equal to, remember, the 6.42 plus the 0.7068, and then you have x. Now, all you're going to do in that formula is you're going to substitute. You don't need to write it out again. I just wrote it out again because I erased it from the bottom. So you need to start from here, basically. So 0.7068, and in place of the x now, you're just putting in the 41. So this then would give you an answer of 35.40. So y is basically, which remember y is the monthly income. And this is 35.40. But remember, they told us at the top that the monthly income was in thousands of rands. So what you need to do now is you need to make this a figure that is in thousands of rands. So you don't have to actually write this. I'm just writing it to show it to you. Because it's in thousands of rands, you're multiplied by 1,000. Representing the thousand portion, thousands of rands, and this would be as a rand value 35,400. And you are done with question 2, where you now have estimated that if a person is 41 years of age, his monthly income on estimate should be 35,400 rands. So please don't forget that once you get the decimal, because this is now specifically looking at what the person's monthly income would be, if he's 41, you need to convert that to a rand value. So it'll be 35,400. Okay, that's question 1.2. And then question 1.3. Now, this says to you, use your calculators, and you probably, I think your assignment actually has a question like this as well. In fact, your assignment question should be very, very similar to this. They say to you, use your calculator and compute the coefficient of determination for the data set and interpret your answer. And this is for 5 marks. So here you're going to see that for your coefficient of determination on your calculator, you need to start off by calculating the correlation coefficient first. So again, I'm just going to remove this from the bottom, just so I have some space to work here. So when we have the correlation section of this learning unit that we look at, there are 2 calculations. You have the correlation coefficient. That's the first one. This is denoted by the letter R. So we calculate R, which is the correlation coefficient. And then you have the coefficient of determination. And the coefficient of determination is R squared. So basically, you're squaring the coefficient of correlation. So R squared. So correlation coefficient is always done first, and then you square that to get to your coefficient of determination. Now, there's two ways to do this. You can either use a formula. I'm not going to go through the formula method because this is in the other recording that I did for this learning unit. Here, because the recording that I didn't have the calculator method, I'd prefer to stick to using the calculator method here, and then you can watch the other video to look at the actual formula and where you're not using the calculator method and instead you're using the manual table and calculator method. Okay, so I'm just going to write that down here on the side, that to calculate in particular question 1 here, you can either do it using a formula and then put it onto the calculator, and by that I mean enter it as an equation on and then put it onto the calculator, and by that I mean enter it as an equation on the calculator. Alternatively, they can, like they did in this question, specifically say to you by using a calculator. So this is where you use the calculator functions. You're not entering a formula, you're just using the functions on the calculator. So in the other video, as I said, you can go back and watch that. It will explain to you exactly how you can use your formula, where the values come from, what you need to add on to the table. Remember, I mentioned earlier, you need to add on one more column, which is called the y squared column. I don't have space at the end here, but it would have been at the end. So you have one more column added on, y squared, and then you use the formula for r and you calculate the value of r. So you basically are literally taking the formula and you're entering it onto the calculator. I'll write down what the formula is so you can see what it looks like. It actually looks almost identical to the B formula at the top. So it's exactly the same numerator and almost the same denominator. This is the formula for it. It's also in the formula sheet. So it's n multiplied by the sum of xy minus the sum of x times the sum of y. That's exactly the same as b. And then it is in your denominator also the same thing as b for the first part. So n multiplied by the sum of x squared minus the sum of x then squared. And then it's multiplied by n multiplied by the sum of y squared minus the sum of y squared. So this is the formula for r. Excuse me. So you can either put this onto your calculator once you've put in the values from the tables, or you can be asked to specifically use the calculator. Now, what happens when you're asked to use the calculator? So I'm going to tell you the steps, but I'm also going to upload a worksheet telling you exactly how these steps are carried out as well. So the first thing you're going to do, if you can try it out now, and if you do have a calculator in front of you, that would be ideal. But if you don't stress about it. You can just try it out and like listen in on this recording again at a later stage and then calculate it or try it out. So I'm just going to erase some of this so we can see what we're looking at. So all you're going to do is you start off by on your calculators pressing the mode button or the mode button. I think all standard calculators have it as mode on the top right hand corner. So change your mode to stats mode. So you'll press the mode or setup. I think it's also called setup, if I'm not mistaken. It's on the top right hand corner of your calculator. So press mode or setup and then choose the option that says stats. It's generally option 2. Then you choose the option that says 1 minus VAR. So it'll say 1 minus VAR. This is generally option 1 on the calculator. Then you're going to I'm just clearing the screen so you can see the figures. Then you're going to enter. You'll see when you press 1 minus VAR, it should give you a screen that has X and Y written at the top. So you're going to enter in the first column, the X column, all of these X values. So you'll press 38 and you'll press the equal to sign. This will capture the value 38. Then you'll press 47 and equal to, then 30 equal to, 25 equal to, and so on. Once you're done, use the arrow, remember that round button at the top of your calculator. Use the right hand arrow to navigate to the next column, and then you're going to put in all of these Y values. So 35 and press equal to, 41 equal to, 28 equal to, and so on. And then once you're done with the last value, you're then going to press AC on your calculator. It's generally on the on the right hand side of the calculator, somewhere halfway down. It's generally a green button. On most calculators. I'm not sure if anyone has something other than a Casio. And once you're done pressing the AC button, don't panic or have a heart attack because you don't see anything on your screen at the moment. It's completely normal. It is just basically saying to you that the calculator has captured and saved all of your information, all of your inputs. So you then have the shift button on the left hand corner. So you're going to press the shift button and you're going to then press the number 1 on the calculator. This will bring up a menu. On the menu, you're going to choose option 4, which says VAR. It generally is option 4. Again, it might not be on a different calculator, or maybe on your calculator it's option 3 instead of 4, that kind of thing, but look for VAR. Oh, sorry, I just realized I'm explaining another thing to you. Sorry, I'm explaining the group data section. Let me start that one again. Yes, sorry. It's just, no, it's not you, it's me. I was doing the grouped and ungrouped data section with you instead of the linear regression. Sorry about that. Let me start that again. So you'll still press mode and setup. Almost the same thing, mode and setup first. I will upload this worksheet, as I said, so you will be able to go back to it ahead of your exam. So once you have the mode or setup, on this menu, you're going to choose stats mode again. So the same second step as well, but because we're working with linear regression, I was doing the group data, the descriptive statistics. Here you are doing linear regression, so you're going to choose the option that says A plus BX. So now this will give you the table, like I said, that has X and Y. So again, the same steps are followed. You'll put in each of the X values in the first column and press equal to after every value. You'll see the numbers start to appear on the screen. Once you're done with the X values, use the arrow, that circle at the top to navigate to the Y column, and then again start entering your values, after which you press the equal to sign. So after each value, press equal to, and then it will store all of your X values. And then again, you still do press the AC button. Sorry, let me just look at the questions. Yes, unfortunately, it will be because there are definitely questions like these which ask you to use your calculators. So, unfortunately, the problem is the mark allocation, where when you are asked to use your calculators, you have a different mark allocation compared to when you're asked to use the formulas. Also, the memos specifically allocate marks for the use of a calculator. So if you are showing the formula and the answer, using the other method. Like, let's suppose you don't, or you're not comfortable with using the calculator and you just use the formula. Unfortunately, we are literally asked to not give you the mark for that question. So out of a question like this, which is 5 marks, you'll maybe get about 1 mark at the very most for having your correct answer. But obviously, they did ask you to use a specific method to calculate it, so they're not going to give you the full mark for it. So yes, you do have to know how to use it. So again, here you'll press AC and this will save your information. And then again, step 5 is the same thing. You'll press the shift button and the number 1. So it's almost the same thing that we did do earlier, but just 1 or 2 things were different because we were working with the group data when I was explaining it just now mistakenly. So shift and the number 1, and then you're going to choose the option that says REG. So I think it's option 5 on the calculator. It says REG, which stands for regression. And here, when you are calculating R, remember I said you first have to calculate R, and then this is your correlation coefficient. Then this is your correlation coefficient. And then R squared, which is now the coefficient of determination that they're asking you for in this question. So you are then going to, you'll see option, I think it's 3, if I'm not mistaken. Option 3 on the calculator says R. So you'll press option 3 and you'll press the equal to sign. And this will give you the value for R. And then immediately on your calculator, press the square button. So the square button is somewhere towards the top of your calculator. So press the square button and press equal to. And this will give you your R squared value. And this will be around, it should be around 90. Well, it will give you a decimal, so it'll be 0.9025. It should be hereabouts. You might not get your exact answers as mine is on the screen because this is, they had actually rounded off here first, but it should be in this region. You are allowed a bit of leeway, so it should be about 0.9025. And this must be multiplied by 100 to make it a percentage. So it's 90.25%. So here you have to have your answer as a percentage to 2 decimal places. It is mandatory that it's a percentage. Please don't leave it as a decimal. And then this is your coefficient of determination. If they had asked you in this question for the correlation coefficient, then you wouldn't need to do that last step that I did here where I squared it. Remember here, the only reason we squared this answer is because you wanted the coefficient of determination, and that is R squared. If they said to you, calculate the correlation coefficient, then in step 7 here, where you pressed option 3 and equal to, that would have been your final answer. So you wouldn't have had to go further and square it. You would have got the answer, multiplied it by 100. Actually, with a correlation coefficient, you don't need to multiply it by 100. You actually can leave it as a decimal. But with the coefficient of determination, you will need to multiply it by 100. Okay, so Bradley, to answer your question about the videos. So there are no videos, but as I said, the worksheet that I am uploading for you is very, very detailed. It tells you exactly like I have written on the screen here for the steps that we followed. I just wrote down a short form just to tell you what to press each time. The worksheet I have that I will upload for you tells you exactly what you will need to do. It also has the only things that you will ever be tested on with a calculator. So you're not going to need to do anything more than what would be on the calculator. Sorry, on the worksheet. So there's three calculations that you could be asked. For this learning unit, which is your some of the well, basically the calculations we've done so far. Then there's also stuff for grouped and ungrouped data, but I have everything explained there to you. So it will basically tell you press this button, press that button, this is what it gives you, this is how you will get to certain values. It explains to you that this is what's happening when you press this value and so on. So even if you are not very familiar with the calculator and how to use it, the worksheet will give you everything you need. So you actually only have to learn the things on that worksheet in terms of how to use a calculator in a particular question where they're asking you to use it. Other than that, it really isn't any of the other functions that you would need. So although the calculator has a lot, it really there's so much you can do with with these calculators, and there's so many different functions that you can actually use it for. You will only need to know the ones on that worksheet. So don't worry about any other fancy functions or any other thing that is not on that worksheet. Whatever's on the worksheet is all you need to know. Unfortunately not. So the functions on the calculator come as is. You can't preset them as in, I get what you're saying, like certain things you obviously are able to have easily available, but unfortunately you do have to go through this whole process each time with the calculator if you are asked to do these calculations. But honestly, the most that they go up to with the use of a calculator is just like one question. Like here in this page that is on the screen, there was just one question that asked you to use your calculator. So most of the time, it's just one question that will be asked. So they're not going to ask you here, for example, to do the correlation coefficient and the coefficient of determination and A and B all on the calculator. It will just be one of them. Okay, so we calculated the value of r squared, but we didn't interpret it. And they did ask you to interpret your answer. So that was here at the end of question 1.3. And yes, most definitely you will be able to. Okay, so to interpret this, there is a very straightforward way of interpreting it. And I'm going to show you how to interpret it. So I'm just going to clear the screen so I have some space. And remember, our answer was 90.25%. So basically, and I would even suggest if you feel a bit shaky with some of the steps that we had followed here, and just to make it a bit easier for yourselves, you can go up to that point where we said option 3 would be calculating the value of r. So when you press option 3 and that's r and you press the equal to sign, it will give you a value for r. So on this example, in this example, it was 0.95. If you feel like you are not comfortable with the calculator, take the 0.95 and I'm going to write it first and then I'll explain it to you. So what you can do is you can take that, write down that answer of 0.95. So you'll say R is equal to 0.95. Write this down on your answer booklet and then press the on button again on your calculator. So literally the on button, or even just press the mode button again and change it to normal mode. So press mode and you'll see it'll come up as normal mode again. Okay, so I just wanted to check I think it comes up as math mode. So press mode and then you'll choose math mode to go back to like its original setting. And then just write down or type in into your calculator 0.95 and then square it and multiply it by 100. If you feel like you're not going to get the correct answer or you're going to mess it up by entering something different on the calculator, that kind of thing, write down your answer of R and then go back to your normal math settings on your calculator by pressing the mode button and choosing the first option. It will revert to the normal settings on your calculator, not stats mode, and just type in 0.95, square it, and multiply by 100. Honestly, I would advise this because if you're not comfortable with the calculator, obviously you don't want to take a chance and mess it up somehow. So write down the value of R and then just go change the setting on the calculator back to normal math mode and calculate R squared. So type in the 0.95, square it, multiply it by 100, and then you'll get the 90.25%. So I'm just going to write that answer here again. R squared is 90.25%. And how you interpret this, basically what R squared tells you is the extent to which changes in X impacts the change in Y. Now remember, X and Y are the independent and dependent variables respectively. So we always said that the relationship is one way. When there's a change in X, it affects the change in Y, or it affects Y itself, but it doesn't work in the opposite direction. So basically, you're saying that whenever the X variable changes, it explains the change in the Y variable because Y is dependent on X. So this now, the coefficient of determination tells you the extent of the variation. So basically, it's telling you, does X changing explain 100% of the reason as to why the Y variable changes, or does it explain 50% of the reason that Y changes, or does it explain 60% of the reason that Y changes, that kind of thing. So we just want to know, does X wholeheartedly explain the variation in Y, or what is the percentage that explains the variation in Y? So here you're basically saying that 90.25% of the variation in the Y variable here is the monthly income. So in the monthly income, is explained by the variation in X is the age of the employee. And that's your interpretation. So basically, you're saying that a change in X explains the change in Y. And now you're saying that this is the extent to which the change in X explains the change in Y. So 90.25% of the change in the Y variable is explained by the change in the X variable. If you actually, and I'm going to highlight here, if you feel like you don't want to say what the X and the Y variables are here, you can actually just replace it. And I'm going to write it in another color just to show you that you can replace these. You can just say the variation in Y if you don't feel comfortable with actually saying what the Y variable is. And in place of the X variable, the age of employee, you can just say with actually saying what the Y variable is. And in place of the X variable, the age of employee, you can just say X. So if you read it like that, it would say 90.25% of the variation in the Y variable is explained by the variation in the X variable. So you can even do that if you feel like you're not comfortable with actually mentioning what the Y and X variables are, then you can also write it out like that. Okay, so that is your first question. I know we're already at 7:10. 7. So I'm just going to very, very quickly go through the question on the next page. So we can just do another example of this. So here it's pretty much the same thing. It is a 20-mark question where they've given you 6 values. This is based on the salespeople who work for a company and their sales in thousands of rands over the last 6 weeks. So they've said to you from the table that the years of experience of each employee is the X variable and the sales is the Y variable. It's also in thousands of rands. So the first thing they said to you is to complete the table below again and then apply the formula and determine the line of best fit. So we're doing the exact same thing that we did in the previous question. We're determining what the values of A and B are for this equation. Y is equal to A plus BX. So in the table, and they gave you the format of the table again, they told you complete the table below. They told you X, Y, X squared, and Y and XY. So I'm going to just extend the table here and add in a column for X squared and XY. And we're going to calculate these values. So X squared is literally just squaring each of these. So 7 squared, 49, 4 squared, 16, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 2 squared is 4 again. Then you're going to, in the last column, x, y means take each x variable and multiply it by its respective y variable. So 7 times 280 is 1960. 4 times 220 is 880. 1 times 80 is 80. 2 times 160 is 320. 3 times 40 is 120. And 2 times 180 is 360. So you're done with the first part of the table. You have to and cannot forget about the totals. So here it's the sum of x. This is 19. The sum of y is 960. The sum of x squared is 83. And the sum of xy is 3720. So now you're done with the table. You need to calculate the values of A and B. So the values of B, the value of B is calculated as n multiplied by, so n is the number of figures they gave to you here. Sorry, I ended off that curve earlier. So it should be n here, that's 6 values, times the sum of xy, which is the 3720, minus the sum of x is 19 times the sum of y, which is 960, and that's your numerator done. Your denominator is n times the sum of x squared, which is the 83, minus the sum of x, which is 19. Oh, sorry, I erased it instead of highlighting it. It's 19 squared. So basically put the 19 into brackets and then square that. So here, this is 29.78 as your value for B. And then you will simply put that into the formula for A, which is the sum of Y, and that is 960, minus B, which is 29.78, multiplied by the sum of x, which is 19, and that's over n. So this is 65.7. And now you have the values for A and B. So you put that into your equation. It will read y is equal to 65.7 plus 29.78. And you put in your x. Sorry, I sort of squashed that in here. Let me see if I can move that. Yeah. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to point out is that it is possible for you to get negative numbers for both the values of A and B. So please don't be alarmed if you do get a negative value. It's completely normal. It values of A and B. So please don't be alarmed if you do get a negative value. It's completely normal. It is something that happens a lot of the time. So it's completely perfectly fine to get a negative value. Okay, so that's your first question, 1.1. Question 1.2 then said to you to estimate the sales in thousands of rands. So they asked you specifically in thousands of rands that would have been produced in the last 6 weeks by a salesperson who has 5 years of experience. So firstly, you are asked to estimate the sales. Sales is Y. It's your Y variable. So basically they're saying determine what Y is, estimate what Y is if X, which is the years of experience, is 5. So basically X is 5 and you are trying to calculate Y. So all you're doing is rewriting that formula. So that formula that we determined, your linear regression equation, Y is equal to 65.7 plus the 29.78x. You are now replacing the x. So take out the x and replace it with 5. 5 years of experience. So this is going to be 214.6. But again, they asked you for the answer in thousands of rand. So you are going to multiply this by 1,000 to bring it to thousands of rands. Again, you don't need to write this out. This times 1,000. You don't need to write that out. You will then simply multiply it by the 1,000 and that will give you 214,600 rand. So the estimated sales then is 214,600. Okay, so that's question 1.2 for 3 marks. And then question 1.3 is exactly the same as it was on the previous page as well. It is calculating the coefficient of determination on your calculators and then interpreting your answer. So again, let's write out how you would do this. So you're going to, let me just clear this. On your calculators, you're going to press Shift, change it to stats mode. It should be number 2. Then you'll choose the option that says A plus BX. So this is generally option 2 as well. It should say A plus BX. Once you have that, you'll see the table come up. It'll say X and Y. Then you'll enter each X value. So you'll press 7 equal to, 4 equal to, 1 equal to, 2 equal to, 3 equal to, 2 equal to. Use that circle at the top. Use the right arrow to navigate to the next column. And then you'll enter all of these. So 280 equal to, 220 equal to, 80 equal to, and so on. Once you're done, you will press the AC button. So number 3 is to press the AC button on your calculator. It's on the right-hand side. I think it's next to the on button, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so you'll press AC. The screen will go blank. It just again means that it's saving all of your information. Once you're done with that, you're going to press Shift and the number 1. So this is step 4. Shift and the number 1 will bring you a menu, another menu. So once you have that menu, you're going to choose the option that says REG. It should be option 5. It doesn't have to be option 5 because some versions of the calculators are different, but look for the one that says REG. And then you are calculating the coefficient of determination. But remember, the calculator doesn't give you this. It gives you the one before this, which is the correlation coefficient. So it's going to give you R first, and then you will calculate your answer for the coefficient of determination by squaring that. So when you press number 3, this will be the R value. So option 3 will give you R. So again, as I said, you can, if you are, and I would personally advise that, write down this value. So R is 0.72. Now, go back to the mode on the calculator on the top right hand corner, literally the first button or the second button, and press mode again and choose the first one, the one that takes you back to the mathematical format of the calculator. So now that you've made your calculator normal again, if you can say that, all you have to do is type in 0.72 on your calculator. Also, write this down on your answer booklet so you know what R is. So type in 0.72 on your calculator, press the square button, and then once you have your answer, you will simply multiply it by 100. So this should give you around 51.84%. And this is your answer for your coefficient of determination. And again, they asked you to interpret here. So when interpreting, you're getting, okay, so that most likely means that you entered the values incorrectly onto the calculator. You'll need to go back and check if you've maybe left out a number for X, or you've left out a number for Y, or maybe you left out a 0, or you entered one more 0, that kind of thing. You need to obviously go back and check. This R and R squared cannot be negative. A and B can be negative, but R and R squared can, well, R can be negative, but R squared cannot be negative. It's also possible that you maybe are not squaring it correctly. So when you're squaring it, there's a button on the calculator. I can't tell you exactly which button it is because that's going to be a bit difficult since everyone's calculator is different, but I can show you what it should look like. You basically will have a block that looks like the button with a block that looks like this, and it'll have the square sign at the top. So when you press the 0.72, you'll type in 0.72 and immediately press the square button and you'll multiply by 100. But R squared cannot be negative. R can be negative, but R squared cannot be negative. The calculations for R, you will see in the other video as well. There it covers the value of R and how it's calculated. So please make sure that you do watch that other video as well. Between that video and this one, we've covered every single thing that they can ask you in this learning unit. So please make sure you do watch the other video as well. Okay, so to interpret this answer of 51.84, remember it's telling you to what extent the change in the X variable explains the change in the Y variable. So here X is your years of experience, and then Y is your sales. So you're going to then say that 51.84% of the variation in sales is expansion in sales is explained by the variation in years of experience. And that's it. And that's your interpretation of your coefficient of determination. All you're saying here is that any change in the Y variable is explained by the X variable. And here you're saying the extent to which it's explaining it. So 51.84% of the change in Y in your sales is explained by the change in X, which is your years of experience. Okay, so that is it for today. I'm hoping that it's not too much. Naturally, this is again something that will require a bit of practice. So I would suggest maybe just when I upload this worksheet, like I always say to you, try out the question without watching, or maybe watch the video, download the worksheet, try it out again for yourself and then come back to this video and check that your answers are correct. So you know that you are on the right path, you know that you are comfortable with it. There's no issues with how to enter values or how to calculate or interpret and so on. I will upload this immediately once we're done with the session, this worksheet, the previous worksheet, and that additional recording. And I will upload this recording and I will upload the calculator worksheet as well. So you can have a go at it from now until our session next week. Thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will chat to you again next week. Are there any questions before I end off the session? Anything at all that you're confused about or you need me to explain again? If there is anything that you would need help with, or maybe at the moment you feel like you don't have all the questions that you need, please feel free to drop me an email. I'm happy to assist you. I'm happy to guide you along the way. I know obviously at this point you haven't actually tried anything out for yourself. So maybe once you've tried out a question and you know where you're going with it, if there's anything that comes up, please feel free to email me, or you can even ask me in the next session before we start so that I can maybe explain it to you on the screen or something like that. I'm happy to assist. Okay, so it doesn't seem like there are any questions. I will then end off for today. Cheers, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll chat again next week.